Welcome to the Bookish Spell, your cozy corner for all things bookish. I'm Angie, your host, and each week I'll be diving into the magical world of books, sharing reviews, author interviews, and so much more. New episodes drop every Wednesday, so grab a cup of coffee and get ready to turn the page with me.
So welcome on to the show. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to our listeners? Tell us who you are.
Hi, I'm Greene. I am the author of Born Blooded, so I am an author of generally queer fiction and shockingly sci-fi, which I never thought I would say, but my debut
Really?
is sci-fi.
Actually, I'm a little bit curious. What will defy a sci-fi novel?
So since the book is mostly superheroes, I actually put a poll out to my beta readers, and I'm like, do you think this is science fiction or do you think this is fantasy? Because I was Googling and there are so many different answers.
Yeah.
Ultimately, though, because the setting is near future and more tech heavy, and I do describe the superpowers in a more technological way, I erred on the side of science fiction because I also think if you go into the book expecting a fantasy novel, you're probably going to be disappointed. Because as much as I am a big fantasy lover, I don't have a ton of those elements in there, which again was shocking to me most of all.
Yeah. It's interesting because I feel like I read something, it was not that long ago, but I can't remember what book it was. But when I went to go leave my review on Goodreads, the genre says sci-fi. I'm like, well, it didn't feel like a sci-fi novel, but I can't remember what it was. So that's why I asked. I was a little curious what makes it a sci-fi.
Well, it's kind of like how Star Wars, as much as we all think of it as like a sci-fi movie, technically is more fantasy because the Force is like the predominant element you're dealing with. And that is, of course, a fantasy element.
Tell us about your book. Tell us, well, you already told us the name, but tell us a bit about it. Like, how did you start your story? What is it about? What can we expect?
Absolutely. All right. So, Warm Blooded is ultimately, at the end of the day, a story about figuring out what it means to be a hero to you personally in a world that treats heroes as a commodity and people with superpowers as either a hero or a villain, and there's no in between. The way that I started working on the story is I've always loved the shield characters, the characters whose power in front of people who aren't necessarily aggressive type of character who are the best fighter, but the characters who can take a hit and are super critical. And then I also really love fire-powered characters. And so I kind of started from that power set of two people, one who feels like he isn't the strongest hero, and another who feels like he hurts everyone. And that's kind of where I started. And then I said, all right, what do I think our world would look like if there were superpowers? And kind of did it as a thought experiment. And I landed more on the X-Men style. I do think there would be a lot of people who reacted very negatively. I drew a little bit on my experiences as a disabled person and how people expect you to present in a very specific way that is acceptable. And the second you kind of stray outside that boundary, you're met with a lot of hostility. And then it just kind of grew from there. I also love college stories and finding yourself once you get to leave home and go to a new place. So I drew on that a lot as well. And so I said, all right, I think there would probably be one or two. I ended on one program in the whole world that would allow you to get a license to become a hero, which is the only way that people with powers are allowed to use them. And then I just ran with it.
Oh, very interesting. Nice. All right. Is this meant to be a standalone? What can we expect?
So this is a planned trilogy, and then I do intend to have a fourth book that's just short stories of all the characters, because there are a lot of characters who don't get a ton of screen time in the main trilogy. But when I develop my characters, I have a sheet. I have basically where you're from, how old are you, and what's your rough background. So every character I write does have a fully developed backstory, which is sometimes a hindrance because then I just sit there pouting. I'm like, no, I want them to have more screen time, but I don't have the word count for it. I'm already so long. So it will be 3 books, and you can read the 4th or you can leave it off. But I think the 4th is going to be a lot of fun because I already have a 20-page document of ideas for what little shorts I can put in there.
Well, I think people will love that because I know, at least for me, when I read a book, I want to know more of where that character came from. Every time I want to know more. So that's a really good idea, I think, to kind of give the readers that what we do look for is where did that person come from? I love it. All right, tell us a little bit about like what's your favorite part or of the writing process.
Ooh, I thought you were going to say the book, and I was like, I can't say that. There are too many. But writing process, I'm a plotter, so I do spend a good amount of time setting up my plot and knowing what I want to do. But I do think my favorite part is I struggle with beginnings. So the first like 20% of a book is really rough for me. And then I'll get past that 20% and then it just goes. I actually wrote the first draft for Warm Blooded in 4 months, and it is 140,000 words.
Wow.
So that was insane. But I wrote the last, I want to say 70% in like a month and a half. Because again, once I get past that first part, it just kind of goes because I know what my characters are doing. I know where they have to go. And so my favorite part is that just magic moment where you hit your stride and it just happens. And yeah. And then I also love the part where I get to hand it off to my beta readers and then I get a bunch of screaming in my inbox saying, how dare you? That's also pretty good.
Actually, so you make a good point there because as an aspiring writer myself, I never fully start because I struggle with how do I open the book? What advice do you have for maybe other writers who struggle with that?
The biggest advice I have is just write something. You can hate it all you want, but you should never be allowed to go back and touch it until you have a complete draft. Because the second you let yourself be consumed with the opening, you're never going to make it to the end. And the best part about writing is sometimes that opening does have to change once you make it to the end because you realize, oh, this would actually be better. And so you spent all this time revising something that probably once you get to your final draft, you're going to go, I'm just going to rewrite that anyway. I did rewrite chapter 1 entirely in my last pass of edits. So I'm speaking from experience here of a lot of times you don't know how to begin until you know how to end. And it's, if you're like me and you write linearly and you just have to have something, just put something down. It can be very bare bones. I do think chapter 1 ended up getting a lot more content from the first draft. I'm trying to remember because that was a while ago now. But that one ends up being the one that you kind of have to restructure to better serve what you're trying to do in the end. So it's okay to just put something down. It can be as simple as in the first chapter of my book, Kieran, the main character, makes it to the school. That's what happens in chapter 1. So if I was really struggling, sometimes I just be like, he went to this place and he stayed there for a couple hours and then he went to the school. The end. Chapter 2. And it's okay to use those placeholders, especially when you're starting out, because the beginning is 100% the hardest part.
Yeah. I agree with that. No. All right. So my next question for you is, do you have any writing routines or specific habits to help you stay on track or productive?
I really like using Pacemaker because I can say, okay, I want to write this amount of words per day, but I write in sprints. So it's sometimes hard to be like, oh, I wrote for 15 minutes and I only wrote 200 words. This is going to take forever. But every time you update your progress on Pacemaker, even if you haven't met your goal, it gives you a little burst of confetti on your screen. And you're like, oh yeah, look at that. I wrote words. So I find Pacemaker really helpful. I also try to dedicate usually 8 to 9 p.m. every night, or every weeknight rather, as my writing time. It doesn't matter if I am just plotting a book. It doesn't matter if I'm doing edits. It doesn't matter if I'm writing something new. It doesn't even matter if I am writing myself little notes about things I want to change but am not allowed to change yet. All of it counts as long as I am doing something on my writing projects during that time. That's allowed. I'm not allowed to be on my phone. I have to put it away.
That's
And
hard.
just having a dedicated time to work on those projects, I think, is the most helpful, especially when you start letting yourself do other things. Like if you really, really don't want to write, but you want to work on your project, it could just be brainstorming. It could be making a playlist to listen to while you write. That counts.
Mhm.
Just
Mhm.
something to further your goal, I think, is the most helpful thing. And just setting aside a little bit of time every day.
Nice. Now, you said you're a sprinter. I don't know what that is. I heard of a
Okay.
pantser. What's a sprinter?
So this is a technique I was introduced through, oh goodness, introduced to through, there we go, my writing group, which is the Wayward Writers. There's a bot you can add to a Discord server called Sprinto, and you can set I'm going to write for this amount of time, and it'll ping you at the end of the time. You put in your words, and it'll tell you how many words you wrote. A lot of different writing tools. I believe Scrivener has the same tool. Can do that. You can even set a 15-minute timer on your own phone or anything like that. It's just, I'm going to only write and not do anything else for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes. I usually only go up to 20 minutes. Anything after that, I start getting distracted. But you can usually get yourself to like kind of narrow in and focus for 15 minutes at a time. So I find that that's how I write best. I also don't tend to take breaks between sprints. A lot of people recommend doing that. I'm bad. I'm like, no, I'm in writing now. And also I love challenging myself to be like, oh, I'm going to get 34 words per minute written in this sprint. Because also, if you're using Sprinto, it does tell you wrote for 15 minutes, you wrote 400 words. That's however many words per minute, which is very fun. And I am very competitive. So if anyone else happens to be on, I'm like, no, I have to win. And then I write faster, which is good.
Oh, I love that. Okay, that's interesting. I haven't heard of those ones actually. The one you use is called what again? The writing.
Sprinto. So sprint with an O at the end.
Oh, nice. All right. And have you ever faced writer's block? And how do you overcome it?
I don't know if I have, but there have been days I don't want to write, but it's not necessarily from a lack of ideas so much as I just want to sit on the couch and watch Project Runway.
Yeah. I feel like that's pretty common for more new writers. Is apparently what I've noticed is because when you're more like newly writing or starting to put that process of becoming an author, you have a lot to say. I feel like maybe it's more seasoned authors who struggle with writer's block because I really haven't spoken to anybody who suffers from writer's block.
I think it can be more seasoned writers, and I also think it can be if you are more of like a pantser, someone who doesn't plan their novels out, and you get to a point and you're like, I don't know what to do here. Because I will confess, I used to pants a lot, and I think this is the first book I really planned in full, and I think that's why it's the first one I finished, because I actually knew where I was going. So those days when I wasn't really liking what I was writing, I could just be like, yeah, I'm going to fix this later, but I know I need something like this to get me from point A to point B. And once I get to point B, I'll be happier and I can move on. So I definitely think a lot of it has to do with if you know where you're going, even if you hate it, you can make yourself push through. Versus if you're not liking what you're writing is, or how your writing is coming out, and you have to keep writing, you're like, well, what do? I hate everything that's happening right now. And if you don't have that end goal in sight per se, you just hate everything. So of course you're like, well, now I have no ideas and everything is bad and stupid.
I think that makes sense. I read not that long ago. I know it was J.K. Rowling, but I believe it was like she wrote the last book, or she knew what was going to happen in at the ending of the series before she even started on the first book. So I feel like maybe knowing where you're going is easier to kind of build that road getting there than rather than just creating a road and you don't know where it's going.
I'm just following this road and then it went off a cliff. And now I don't know what to do.
That's some pretty helpful advice. So what are some authors or books that may have influenced your writing style, if there is any?
Oh, there's so many.
Nice.
I think the biggest influence is actually Alexandra Rowland, and more specifically their book A Taste of Gold and Iron, specifically because it kind of showed me that as an author, you can spend a lot of time just building the relationships with your characters, and people will still like the book and read it. Because I have always been a little worried that my writing style isn't for everyone, because I really like getting to see those small moments between characters. My chief complaint with most books is they should have been longer. I wanted more. I wanted more interactions. I wanted to see that build more. So getting to read their work and realizing, no, this is a thing that published authors can do, I was so excited. I read a lot of Brandon Sanderson. I don't know, you might be able to see him on my shelf. Actually, no, it's out of frame. Tragic. But I read a lot of Brandon Sanderson, and kind of similarly, he has plots that you really don't know what's going on for a lot of it. You're like, I know at some point this information will make sense. But right now we're just kind of watching people do things. And so again, it was just kind of a nice thing to see that almost it's okay to not know what's going on as the reader. And you just kind of have to trust that the author is going to bring it together in the end, because that's also how I really like to write, is it seems like you're just kind of going through this world and stuff is happening, but then at the end you go, oh wait, that was all important. And so definitely him. I also have to give a shout out to Marissa Meyer, just because I was trying to find comparison titles for my book, and I read Renegades, and I was like, darn, I'm really glad I read this after I wrote the book, because I love the way Marissa Meyer writes, and I would never have had the confidence to write this book if I had read her series first. But yeah, I think those are a lot of them. Yeah.
Beautiful. So what are some of the most challenging parts of writing, maybe that you faced, and do you have any advice on how you overcame them?
I think the hardest part of writing is letting go of certain things.
Oh,
Is
really?
saying, no, I have to cut this out. This doesn't need to be here. Especially when you're long-winded like I am. I had a number of beta readers be like, I think you can shorten this scene. And I'm like, oh, but I really liked that scene. And they're all like, we like it, but we think you can shorten it.
Oh, really? Oh.
And so I think the hardest part of writing is that revision process, because once you've finished a first draft, you're like, I've written a book. Oh my God, I've written a book. I love my book. This is my child, my baby. And then you have to go through it and be like, well, that actually wasn't a very good choice, and I should probably change that. So I think the revisions process, well, let's say getting the first draft is always the hardest, because it means you have to sit down and write something. Because revising means you have a complete work in some way, shape, or form, and now you're just kind of nitpicking. But I think once you've spent so much time and made that first draft, you're very emotionally attached. So it's very easy to get, what's the word I'm looking for? Goodness me. Standoffish is coming to mind, but that's not it.
That's okay.
Oh, goodness. I can write. I promise I know words. What's the word I'm looking for? Defensive. There we go. You get defensive and very protective of all of your words. You're like, no, I wrote all of the words and I love them. When I was doing my first pass of edits, the hardest thing was realizing how many times I said seemed like, or seeming like, or they seemed to. And I think I cut out like 100 uses of the word seem in some way, shape, or form. And so that was kind of, I like sat in a dark room and was like, yeah, I'm not allowed to use that in book 2. I can't say the word seem.
That's like us when we record something and every other word is I do that when I record a video.
It's so hard. The other one is like,
yeah.
I hear myself talking and then I'll say it and I'll just cringe inside. I'm like, no, we just push past, don't ignore it.
That's funny. All right. Do you have any memorable feedback or reviews that you received that maybe really helped shape your book, what it is today?
I don't know if it perhaps shaped the book so much. I shaped lightly how I was marketing one of my characters. Oh, yeah? Because before you find out his name, I had a beta reader reach out to me and go, I don't know who this character is, so I'm just calling him Shadow the Hedgehog in my head, and I need you to know that. And I was like, okay. And now every time I go to market him, I'm like, how would I market Sonic? Not Sonic. Shadow the Hedgehog. How would I market him? So that was good. I also think, another random character, one of my beta readers sent me a message saying, I don't know why I'm picturing Miss Darbus from High School Musical. And I was like, okay, so I'm going to rewrite how I do her intro because that should not be the vibe at all.
That is hilarious.
Yeah, she was like, I don't think you did anything, but this is just what I thought of. And I was like, okay, so we're back to the drawing board on this one. And then what was the other feedback I got? There was one more. Oh, there was one of my beta readers made a comment being like, I thought this guy was like 40 and he's supposed to be 20. And so I just have the main character be like, about my age, which is 20. Not quite in that phrasing, but the main character is younger. So just something so that you didn't think this is a 40-year-old man.
That's funny.
So yeah, it was a lot of like minor things that I was kind of like, well, that's not what I was going for. I will confess, the Shadow the Hedgehog, that was nail on the head. That was what we were going for. So that was nice. Fine.
Oh, beautiful.
Just kind of like very dark and edgy and grumpy. So I was like, yeah, you got it. Continue. You'll find out his name eventually, and it's fine.
I love it. So how did you like acquire your beta readers?
One of my friends is a librarian, so he was the one where I'm like, you need to read my book. I have another friend who's a really big comic book fan, and I was just like, okay, you read a lot of comics. I wrote a book about superheroes and you like superheroes. Can you read it and give me feedback if I'm doing anything like terribly cliche on the genre? And then I also am in a couple bigger Discord servers, and I just kind of put out a call saying like, hey, if you'd be interested in reading a book, I wrote one, I'm looking for feedback. And I got a lot of my beta readers that way. And then I think the best and funnest way I acquired a beta reader was actually the beta reader who did the interior illustrations for my book, Mini Q. I read the script for their video game and offered some commentary because their French, English is not their first language, but they're writing the script in English. So they wanted a couple native English speakers to look at it. It was 70 pages long, and I read it the same day and returned it to her. And so when I said, oh, I have a book and I'm looking for beta readers, she was like, well, you read my script, so let me read your book. And then while they were reading, kept commenting, oh, I can see this so vividly. I want to draw it. And I was like, do you want to draw it? And then she ended up doing 4 full-page illustrations for the book, which was super cool. So it was just kind of a really fun kind of exchange of, I don't want to say talents, but just like services. Like I read for her, they read for me. Yeah. It was a good time, and now we are super good friends. And I'm actually going to Europe to see her at the end of this month, and I'm so excited. Yes.
So how did that feel, having someone create illustrations of your book, and like looking at that illustration, like that's what that person sees? Like, was it what you saw, or was it? I could only imagine it being like a big deal. Like you wrote something.
I cried. Yeah, I fully cried. When she read the book for the first time, she then sent me a little sketchy she had made of how she saw the 2 main characters, which is Kieran and Ifrit, and she nailed the way I had been picturing Ifrit myself. First try, she sent me the sketch of Kieran, and I was like, I feel like he'd have floofier hair, and got back in all caps, you're so right, I thought something was weird about the hair. And after that, like, we were perfectly aligned on how we were picturing them. So I was just like, I don't know if it's just because we're very similar people or because I described them well, but I'm so happy that you kind of got what I was going for. And the illustrations are so amazing, and they make me so happy. And I did print them out to put on my wall.
That's beautiful. So they're in your book?
Yes, they are.
You have them? Yeah,
I had the book on me because I want to show off any chance I can get, because I am obsessed with them, and Minnie did such a good job. Okay, we're in chapter 8, which is where the first one is. So yeah, they're full page illustrations.
Aw, I love it.
And I can only show the first two because the other two are spoilery.
Oh, okay.
Which was funny because I was like, oh, I want to show these off. And then I was like, ooh, I should not show some of these off. But yeah, and that's the second one.
Wow, that's amazing. Let's see the
Yes,
cover.
oh, yes, this is done by Maurice Thomas, known as Rubre. That is RUBRE.art. I do have a faint lisp, and R's are very hard, and I have never tried to say that out loud before, and I realized it as I said it. You couldn't hear it. But yeah, Mariska did an amazing job on the book cover. I have already hired her for book 2, and I'm so excited to see what she comes up with, because this was beyond everything I could imagine. The buildings wrap around the spine. It's all just so beautiful and wonderful, and I also cried. I was at work when I got the final kind of mock-up of the cover, and I had to leave the building. I had to walk outside because I was just sitting in my little cubicle crying a little bit. I was like, this is too weird. I need to go outside.
The book came out what at the end of last year? Was it?
Yeah, my book came out December 21st, so it's only been a couple weeks actually.
Wow! Congratulations! That's amazing.
And somehow, in the span of a couple weeks, my book got back ordered because so many people bought it, and Ingram Spark is both print on demand, but sometimes they'll like pre-print a couple. And then also the Amazon printers, like it was down to like they only had 3 copies on hand to ship out. So that was kind of wild because I did my pre-orders through Northshire Bookstore in Saratoga Springs, New York, and they were having such a hard time getting the physical copies in because so many people had bought them that we're still waiting on the last couple because Ingram has not kept up.
Wow. Did you self-publish or you're traditional publish?
Yes, I am self-published.
Nice.
I was considering going traditional publishing, but for debut novels, the threshold for YA debut novels is about 75,000 words, and I am almost double that. And I had briefly debated cutting the book in half at roughly the halfway point, because there is something that happens that could be like a climax, but I felt like it wouldn't be worth it to the readers to keep reading the series if you thought every end of the book was going to be like that. And at the end of the day, I value like the integrity of the book I'm putting out more so. I actually had met with a professional editor that works with one of the big publishing houses because I had said, okay, here's my query letter. I've been querying for a bit. I haven't gotten any bites. Am I making some like industry faux pas in my query letter or in my first 10 pages? Is there something wrong here? And she was like, no, this is actually one of the best query letters I've seen in a while. And I was like, oh, thank you. She goes, the issue is just how long your book is. Can you cut it in half? And I went, okay, we're self-publishing.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. How do you start with like traditional publishing? You just send them emails to publishing houses?
So the traditional route you want to go, because there's very few publishing houses that accept unsolicited manuscript. What's the word? Or submissions. So typically you have to go through an agent. That's what the querying process is querying to get yourself an agent. And most agents, if you are over 120,000 words, used to be for adult fantasy and sci-fi, kind of the maximum. And you had to have a really strong pitch for anyone to look past that. But that has since dropped to about 100,000. And then it used to be about 100,000 for YA, and now that's down to 75,000. So they're really kind of restricting on those word counts because publishers are taking fewer and fewer risks nowadays. So then agents don't want to acquire manuscripts that are harder to sell. So then there's this kind of like creep of the word count getting shorter and shorter and shorter. And I did briefly, because I do have an idea for a shorter story. I was like, do I want to write that before I try to publish this, because this is going to be longer? And ultimately I went, no, because I don't want to write a book with the intent of I need to get this book published so that way I can publish other books, because I knew my heart wouldn't be in it as much and it wouldn't be, again, as good a quality product for the readers. So I said, you know what, self-publishing sounds fun. And that meant I got to get interior art for the book, because I could just go up to an artist and be like, can you do art for me? I got a map, but a lot of sci-fi books don't have maps. And
Nice.
I think that's a shame. Every book deserves a map. I don't care if you need to reference it or not. Maps are cool. So I did get a map artist. I got to have a real big hand in the creation of the cover, because for a lot of traditional publishing, you just kind of, the publisher makes the cover and then you find out what your cover looks like at the end of the process. So self-publishing is, I will definitely say this, great if you are a micromanager. If you want to know everything and want to have a finger in every piece of the pie, self-publishing will be for you. You will be very annoyed with traditional publishing, because in trad publishing, it's just kind of, you send the manuscript off, you'll get your edits back from whatever editor the publishing house is using, and then you sit back while the book does its thing and you mark it. And if you didn't have to mark it, I would have said it would be worth it. But since now even traditionally published authors really do need to do a lot of marketing, if it doesn't get me out of marketing, it's not worth it.
Yeah, I agree. Wow, I did not know
Marketing
that.
is the bane of my existence.
I know. But it's like that for everyone now. No matter what you do for a living, you have to market. It's silly. The way our life became. All right. So my next question to you is, how do you stay motivated to write, especially during tough times?
This, all of the credit goes to my lovely friend Sam, who is my chapter by chapter beta reader. She reads the chapters as I write them. She gives me commentary inline in the document. She'll write little notes. I will fully call her out. This is the one who thought the one character was like Mrs. Darbus. So I'm fully putting her on blast for that. I love you, Sam, if you ever listen to this. But she reads everything as I write. She and I always call every single week. And so usually if I have a chapter up, she'll give me all her thoughts and her theories. And it's just so fun to get someone kind of reading along as you go and having thoughts and enjoying the characters with you and being, oh, I was so excited about this, or I'm so scared you need to write faster. If you don't write faster, I know where you live. So it's just kind of, for me, one of the most helpful things is having her there. And then the other thing that I have found super helpful is just that it makes me feel good. And I know on days that I don't write, I feel worse. And so I kind of treat it the same way I treat exercise if it's a bad day, which is like, I don't want to write, but I'll feel better if I do it. And so it just becomes kind of a part of my life and my routine, in that I'll drag myself to the computer grumbling all the way, but then I'll start writing and be like, oh yeah, I like doing this.
All right. Have you ever written something that surprised you or took a turn you didn't expect?
Okay. There is something, but it's so spoilery, and I'm trying to think of how to phrase it without giving away. There, even in my outline for this book, there was a character who I had a note saying either one of two things is going to happen, and I don't know which. And so I got to the scene and I was writing, and I audibly gasped when I was writing it. I was like, oh, that does make sense and that works and that's what would happen. But I can't say what it is because this happens about 20 pages from the end of the book.
Well, that's okay.
But there's a number of things that I've written and been like, oh, yeah, that would happen, but I didn't know it. Because the characters really do seem to take on a life of their own, and sometimes they start running in the opposite direction, and I have to go, where are you going? And then I find out later what they were doing. Because I have found that just kind of letting the characters do what they feel like they should be doing has been the most productive and helpful, and usually gets the best results.
Nice. Beautiful. All right. What advice would you give to any inspiring writers who are just starting out?
Oh, read so much. Read everything you can get your hands on. And I don't just mean writing help books. I will confess I have read none of them, because I find them to all say the same thing. I say, having just said I read none of them. I have opened books in the store and started reading and gone, yeah, I know that, and then closed it and put it back on the shelf. But if you want to be a sci-fi writer, read a ton of sci-fi. If you want to write fantasy, read a ton of fantasy, because at the end of the day, what those writing books are going to tell you is how to write a quote unquote good book if you are meeting certain metrics. But as what you should be writing is what you want to write and what you want to read. And so when you read a lot, you can say, oh, I really liked this element. Oh, I really liked that element. I really hate this. I used to write almost exclusively in first person. And then I realized as I would like, pick up a book and realize it was first person, go, oh, it's in first person. I realized I didn't really like first person that much. And that's why I had so much trouble with my own writing, was because I just didn't like the narrative I was in. And when I switched to writing in third person, suddenly I liked my writing significantly more. I didn't do nearly as much rewriting because I just liked that better. At the end of the day, you are your first reviewer. You're the first reader of your book. So if it's not something you like, you're never going to be satisfied with it, no matter how many revisions or edits you do. So definitely read a ton. And then the other thing is write a ton. Just keep going. It's the best way to figure out what works for you as a writer is just to throw things at the wall and see what sticks. If you don't like writing epic fantasy, maybe you like writing urban fantasy. If you're not liking how your contemporary novel is going on, maybe try a historical or a near future or a fantasy set in a completely different world. Because you never know. You never know what you're going to like. I never thought I'd read a sci-fi book because I was like, yeah, I don't read that much sci-fi. My boss at work is a huge sci-fi nerd. So he and I have been swapping recommendations for the past year or so, which I think is why this ended up coming out superhero, because I was just so much in that sci-fi headspace. I was like, oh yeah, sci-fi can be cool.
Nice, nice. All right. So what are some of your favorite books to read?
Ooh. Well, I'm going to say A Taste of Gold and Iron again, because that still is my favorite book of all time. One of my favorite books that I read last year was Icarus by Kay Ancrum. That book is so... You read it? I love that book so much.
I haven't read it. I wanted to, though. I will.
You should. You absolutely should. It's so good. I actually have a full review of it up because I was like, if I can convince people to read one book in 2025, I want it to be that one. I also really loved Teenage Dirtbags by James Acker, Lucy Undying by Kirsten White. I'm a big Dracula nerd. Actually, the book I'm reading right now is a biography of Bram Stoker.
Oh, nice.
So big Dracula fan. So when I saw Lucy Undying, I was absolutely thrilled. I borrowed it from the library, I read it, and then when I finished it, I went out and bought a copy same day. Immediately, I was like, I need to own this book. I also love Practical Rules for Cursed Witches by Kayla Cottingham. I haven't heard people talking about that book nearly enough. It's a cozy, like Studio Ghibli-esque fantasy, and it's just so good. I can't even explain how much I love that book.
Right.
Yeah, the issue with liking writing is it cuts into my reading time.
Yeah.
Because I have so many books that I can just gush about for hours, but I'm rambling and I'm going to make myself stop.
Okay. Have you always been a big reader?
Oh, I held the record for number of books read over a summer at my local summer reading program. I don't think it's been beat since. I was an advanced reader. I read the first Harry Potter book when I was in kindergarten. And then I thought the second one was really boring and didn't read it for a while.
Yeah.
But I was always kind of head in a book. In fifth grade, I was in the Gifted and Talented program and we read Hamlet. And then I really fell in love with Shakespeare. So I was a very weird little 10-year-old reading through all of Shakespeare's plays. I had the giant compendium of all his works, and I would just be like, reading through it. And all the adults were like, is your kid okay? To my mom, because everyone else would be being rowdy, and I just sit down and be reading.
Aww,
so yeah, I have always been a huge reader, and my dream, actually, when I was a kid, what I thought being a rich person meant was having a lot of books, and specifically having like those glass-fronted bookcases.
Yeah.
And the first thing I did when I moved out was I bought myself a glass-fronted bookcase. And I was like, little Jay, we made it. We made it big.
Well, I mean, having a glass-fronted bookcase is probably the best way to store your books because it keeps them a little bit more protected.
Yeah, and I did have to get the glass fronted bookcase simply because I have a rabbit and he likes to eat books.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So this is for the book's own good. And it is a little more expensive, but he's free roaming, so he has full access to the house at all times. Well, he goes in at night, but he will go for the books if I don't have a physical barrier. Sometimes I will forget this and I'll try to like read lying down, but if I'm on the floor, he thinks I'm there to play with him, and then it's just me like huddling over my book like, you can't eat this. You have so many things you can eat. Why are you going for the thing that I have?
That's cute. So do you tend to read like all different genres, or what is one of your favorite genres?
I say I read all genres, and then my Storygraph review really called me out because it was about half fantasy and then everything else. So I'm primarily a fantasy reader, but I do read science fiction. I read nonfiction. I'm very, very big into reading history books. My office thinks I am horribly boring because, what was it? There was in New York City, there was an open event where you could see medieval medical textbooks from a collection. And I took time off to go to that. And I was so excited about that because I was like, oh yeah, I thought this would be more fun than, taking the day off for my birthday because it was a couple weeks before my birthday. And one of my coworkers was like, no, it wouldn't be. But I read a lot of history. I do read quite a bit of YA, but that's because I'm a no spice reader typically, and I find that it's easier to find books without if I am hiding in the YA section a little bit. I also do read poetry, and I do read a slightly concerning amount of like occult fiction or just like books on the history of magic to the point of multiple people gifting me books on like modern witchcraft, and I'm like, no, I don't care about the modern stuff. I'm sorry. I like the history. I think that's cool. I also had someone gift me like a I'm a witch shirt, and I was just like, this is the vibe I'm putting out. I guess I should just accept it.
That's funny. Do you have any hobbies or interests outside of writing? Well, besides reading, I guess.
I'm also a fairly avid gardener, which does not help with the witchcraft accusations, especially because I do like poisonous plants. I think they're cool. My parents went to Ireland and brought me back a packet of poisonous seeds from some like poisonous plant garden, and my mother was so proud of herself. She was like, I think you'll love this. And I'm like, you are correct, but your first thought for me was poison? And she was like, yeah. So yeah, I love gardening. I love baking. I actually just got a Lord of the Rings inspired cookbook, and then immediately bought myself some green cloth and made custom little leaf beeswax wrap pouches so it looks like the Malord leaves. So just general like crafty stuff. I've been meaning to get back into painting. I confess I have fallen off, but I just like being busy. So I always feel the need to have something to do. I don't sit still unless I'm reading or writing. Those are the only two times. But yeah, I have so many hobbies. Too many hobbies for how much free time I have.
Okay. And if you could live anywhere in the world, where would it be and why?
Ew, that's tricky. I confess I am horribly biased to New York State just because I grew up here and I do love it. But I also think if they would let me live in the Hobbit set, like the Shire set in New Zealand, that would be really great, if only because I am also very short. So finally, all the cabinets would be reachable.
How tall are you?
I'm 5'2", so I'm not that short, but all of my friends are tall for some reason. And every time I find someone shorter than me, I get so excited.
I'm 5'11". 4'11". Sorry, no, not 5'11".
I was like, short. How dare you? It's okay. One of my other lovely beta readers, Jennifer, is 4'10". So, so you're not the shortest person I know, even. Technically, the shortest person I know is the bunny because he's about yay
Oh
high.
yeah. All right. And do you have any go-to comfort foods or favorite meal?
There is a very specific recipe that I like called red golden green skillet, which is basically mac and cheese with bell pepper and tomato added. I
Oh.
think the thing I love the most is it is equal parts cheese to pasta when I make it. I love that. I also, my all-time favorite food is, or my all-time favorite dessert is strawberry shortcake because it's just cake and strawberries and whipped cream and you can't go wrong with that. And then I think the comfort food I always go for when I'm sick is tortellini soup because that was what my mom always made us. And so that's, if I'm at all sickly, I will just make a disgusting amount of that soup. And my poor partner, who's not a soup person, will be like, can we have something other than soup? And I'll be all nasally and be like, no.
All right. And do you have a favorite movie or TV show?
My favorite movie for a very long time, remaining undethroned, was How to Train Your Dragon. I love that movie. I love that movie. But it has very recently become slightly precarious in its placement with Nimona. I love that movie. I think it is a perfect movie. I think all the jokes land perfectly and they are given the correct amount of time. Nothing goes on too long. The emotional moments, they also let you sit with them for a minute. It's not just there and gone. I think the animation's amazing. I think that it just generally being kind of an allegory for the trans experience is so beautifully done. And Ballister also has big puppy eyes, so I'm a sucker. So yeah, I think it is Nimona. Also honorable mention, I think it was 1985's Clue. I love that movie. I have introduced so many friends to that movie. I love the humor in it and how it's just so over the top and goofy. So yeah, I'd say Clue, Nimona, and How to Train Your Dragon are my top 3 movies of all time.
So how do you feel about the adaptation for How to Train Your Dragon?
I
hear the internet is upset, but I never seen it. How to Train Your Dragon.
You have to. It's so good. The second and third movies are good, but I haven't really rewatched them nearly as much as I rewatched the first one.
Really?
I definitely agree with people who said if you really wanted a live action, just cast Jay Baruchel, who's the voice of Hiccup, as the live action Hiccup because he already kind of looks like it.
Oh, really?
And I do think it isn't something that needed to be made because I also think it does a disservice to the animation industry when we keep making these live actions of animated movies or TV shows or anything like that, because animation has its place and you cannot, with physical people, get some of those effects. And I definitely think it is a little bit of a money grab. It's like this thing you love, but worse. And I'm not saying that the live action will be worse, but it does seem like they're trying to recreate it one-to-one, in which case it's like, why would you do that? Because, again, a lot of what makes the original movie work is the animation of it all and how it weaves in with the story, and it does a really good service to the story.
This is the light on the camera. So
you're so right.
I feel like with like the live action films, it's definitely be more catered to us as adults now. I mean, it's very like this is your favorite movie as a kid now into a movie which you'll watch because you're an adult, so you like movies now. They don't forget that even as adults we still like cartoons. So
yeah, and there are some that have been done well. I will confess. Well, firstly, I didn't watch the original Avatar: The Last Airbender until mid to late high school. I didn't actually watch it while it was airing. I watched it after the fact. but I didn't finish watching the live action season just because it wasn't the same in the sense of the themes. Because again, I think if you're going to remake something, you should be taking it on from a slightly different angle and not just trying to recreate one to one, because you're never going to be able to do that. And there's no reason to, quite frankly. But at the same time, you still have to retain the spirit of that piece if you want to get those audiences and have them be happy. I think the TV show Percy Jackson is a much better kind of up to more modern sensibilities adaptation of a piece of media that's very beloved by people who are now adults. But yeah, so I definitely think there have not been a lot of good live action adaptations. And it does feel slightly like they just don't want to put the time and energy into creating something new.
I do have to. I just recently watched the new Lion King, or Mufasa, they call it. Mufasa. It was really good.
Okay, I haven't seen it. I think they can do things well. There just has to be some thought behind it, and not just we're making a new one.
Well, it was like, it's the backstory of Mufasa, how Mufasa became, he's Simba's dad. So Mufasa's Simba's dad, and it tells you his back. It was so good that I cried. And I have not felt that way for like one of those like the Disney live action films in a really long time, because my favorite like Disney live action film was Cinderella. That was their first, and to me that was a good one. I enjoyed it. I love the Cinderella. I don't know, but the Lion King one, you have to watch it. I thought it was amazing. The story was.
I definitely will. I was actually talking to someone about this earlier today. I need to watch more movies this year. Last year, I think I watched 3 movies.
Oh, really?
I watched almost no movies last year. And I was thinking about this. I was like, I need to fix that. I need to fix that immediately. Because I do want to see Wicked. I want to see Wicked so bad. And I've heard everyone say it was good. So I'm like, okay. And I have seen Wicked, not on Broadway, but on the West End. I was in London after graduating high school, and we got to see Wicked on the West End stage, and I had never heard anything about it, but I really, really liked it, and I'm so excited to see what they do with it in a movie setting, because obviously they can do much more elaborate backgrounds and things. And it's also so impressive that Ariana Grande and Cynthia, I'm gonna butcher her last name. I'm actually not gonna try her last name because it just went from my brain. But Cynthia, the actress of Elphaba, both did live singing. It's like they didn't have to do that. They totally could have flubbed it, but they said absolutely no, we're doing it. And I think that's just, I respect the artistry enough to be like, no, I should go see it in theaters. I'm not going to rent it. I'm going to go help them have a good opening, because that really speaks to how much they value the quality of the work they're doing. So
it was really good. You have to, well, I mean, we could read the books. I never read the Wicked books, so I guess maybe for me watching it, I was just like, well, I want to know what else happened. It was such a big cliffhanger for me. But other people who are like super Wicked fans, like, know the entire story, so it wasn't that big of a deal. For me, it was a huge deal because like I wasn't ready for it.
No, I've had a number of books that I was like, this is going to be a 5-star book. This is going to be a 5-star book. And then I was like, this has to be a 4.5, because I didn't realize it was a series.
No.
I'm so mad about it. This happened twice in like the past month. And I was like, how dare you? I love this and I want more immediately. And both of these books I got right after they came out, because I'm like, oh, this sounds really good.
Oh, yeah.
And then they were both the first book in a series.
Oh, no, it's hard. But that's how I felt about Wicked. I honestly, I just never knew much about Wicked until recently. Like, I had no idea Wicked was even a series. I really had no clue. I just thought it was a playoff from Wizard of Oz, the movie.
That is also what I thought until I saw the book in store, and then it was next to a bunch of other books, and I was like, interesting.
I hear they're pretty traumatizing, so I don't know. I'm gonna have to read it because I want to know what happens next. And now I know that it's a series turned into a movie. No matter how good the movie is going to be, it's not going to capture everything that's in those books. So now I have to read it.
And I think that is also part of the reason I was so resistant to shortening my books. I'm like, no, the whole point, the beauty of a book is you can go on for however long you want. You get so much detail in books. And that's why I think they're my favorite medium, is just
Mm.
because I'm nosy and I want to know everything.
Yeah, you want to know everything. So I guess what is your book? Probably about 600 pages or what?
It is 520, including front and back matter. So I think the
Okay.
actual run of the book's only like 510 plus illustrations. And I also did want all of the pages or all the chapters to start on the right side of the page. I don't know if you can see it on the camera. It's because that way when you're reading, you can see where the next chapter starts. So you don't
Oh,
have to like sit there and be like, oh, how many pages are left in the chapter? You can just kind of like look at the side and be like, okay. Because I'm always constantly like, how many pages are left?
I do that too. Like when I'm reading and like I get to a new chapter and I know like I gotta get up soon. Obviously, I have 2 children. My life's very chaotic. So like I'll see how long the chapter is. Like, can I get through this chapter or is it gonna take me a while? And if I see it's like a longer chapter, I'll put my bookmark in and wait until I get more time to read. So
Yeah,
that's
so
my
I really wanted to do that for readers so that you didn't have to worry. You could be like, okay, how many pages? All right, we're fine. Or go to bed because I do have some long chapters in there, I will confess.
I love like readers turn authors because they take so much of the readers in consideration when publishing their book. Because there is a
Yeah,
lot of
I was like, this sort of thing annoys me. I'm not doing that.
like diving into this podcast, I learned so much about like just writing and authors themselves that there is a lot of authors I found out that are actually not readers. They just write and don't read.
How does that work? Sorry.
Like I was absolutely shocked and I learned this.
That's so baffling to me. I I read too much. I will say this. I read 173 books last year. So I read too much.
You're a fast
But
reader, right?
oh, I am a monster. I had a friend over and he stepped out for I want to say like 4 hours and I was reading a series and he left when I was about 2/3 of the way through book one and when he got back I was a quarter of the way through book three because he walked in and he's like, oh, is that the same book? I'm like, no, it's book three. And he's like, book three? And I was like, yeah, why?
Girl, that's impressive.
The one thing I will say is my nonfiction books, I read much slower. So this Bram Stoker biography is about 600 pages. If you look online, it will say it's almost 700, but the last 100 pages are just notes. So I'm not reading that. But I read it a lot slower and then I get so like crumpy. I'm like, I could have read 2 other books by now.
I
And
with
I have a
nonfiction.
go
Do you
ahead.
do audiobooks at all? 'Cause, like with nonfiction,
No,
no,
I
it's hard for you.
I got a bad concussion a couple years ago, so I can't even do ebooks. I've tried audiobooks because I would love to be able to listen while I work because I work as an architectural drafter, so it is usually just like drawing stuff. So I could have something on. I listen to a lot of podcasts, but for whatever reason, audiobooks, every time I've tried, they fill me with such rage. I don't know why. They annoy me so much. And I sit there pouting because I'm like, I wish I could listen to audiobooks. I could read so many more books. But I don't know. They annoy me. I think it's also I blame my partner because he listens to audiobooks on 2 to 3 times speed. And so that bothers me. And it's just like the way the voices sound when they're set up annoys me. So I think now I just have like that association with all audiobooks and I have tried multiple. I just can't do them. And it makes me so sad.
Oh, well, that's what I was gonna say to try like the nonfiction because like self-help books, I won't read that. I'm sorry. I feel like I'm in school and I can't. So I'll do self-help and thriller. I can listen to thriller books and it will hold my attention, but there's no way that I'm going to waste my time listening to a fantasy book because I need to read that because I want to jump in that book, you know. So I'll do like
Absolutely.
short thrillers, but those I
I
could
do
do.
have I do have friends who are primarily audiobook readers. So I'll just mess with them and be like, how do I say this? And then I'll get like a little voice note back for the correct way to say it.
That is the only plus about audiobooks is you get to know, you know the name of all the towns, the buildings, the people, like you know it all. But it's impossible. Like I cannot do an audiobook fantasy. It takes the fun out of it for one. So I won't. But like a nice thriller, because I feel like I'm watching a show, like the Freedom McFadden books. They're only like 6 to 8 hours long is her average book, and I do speed mines up, so I could finish like a whole book in one day, which is nice, especially because I work from home too. So I'm not doing like my podcasting book stuff. I'm working from home, which is mainly by appointment. My day job, I'm actually a tarot card reader.
That's fabulous, though.
That's what I do in a day. But just like being home as a parent and cleaning, cooking, and whatever, I will listen to my audiobook. So
yeah,
but
I have so much respect for people who can like really do audiobooks. I just can't focus. They annoy me. And so I'm like, listen, I'm in awe of you, and I'm also incredibly jealous.
I mean, I don't know how some of the people, because that's my problem is when I do audiobook, that's why I would not waste it on a fantasy. Because when you're reading fantasy, you need to know like not paying attention and skipping like even 10 seconds, you're gonna be so lost in the rest of the book.
Yes.
A little thriller book or something like that is fine. I could miss it, like not pay attention to a few pieces. I'll still know generally what's happening. So I don't know how there are some people that do listen to audio and they'll do hardcore fantasy and know everything that happened. And I'm just like, no, because I tried it. I've done like the whole ACOTAR series. Like I done the whole entire series except for the last book in audio. And I am so confused of this story. It's not even funny.
I will confess I have not read ACOTAR because a couple of my friends were like, I don't think it'll be your thing. And I'm like, okay, I trust you. But I also want to know what it's about. So I have watched, I think, 3 or 4 YouTube videos just describing what the plot is. And I'm like, at that point, I should have just read the book. Most of these videos were 2+ hours.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I
don't think it's you. I think it's very convoluted. I do think it is, from what I've gathered, it's a very convoluted plot.
Yeah, I've seen enough spoilers where I get the idea of what the book is about, and I've done the audio, so I know bits and pieces. But maybe what I'm trying to say is I don't get the hype, maybe. And I'm like upset at myself because I am a hardcore fantasy lover. Why am I not obsessing? And it like bothers me.
No, I get that because I personally think I'm a very easy to please reader. I don't think I'm particularly picky. And then I've tried a number of really big series that I will not name, and just been like, really? This is what you guys are obsessed with? I don't get it. And it's just really interesting and super. I think it's super cool how people's interests and likes in a book can be so different. And I've had friends who we're usually so similar, and then one random book we'll both have like super different opinions on. I'm also a little bit known in my book club for being the one who's like, oh, we'll know if Jay doesn't like the book.
Oh,
because I
that's
will be
funny.
like, I don't like it, and here's why you shouldn't either.
That's funny. Yeah, I feel like a lot of that's okay. I feel like a lot of the reason why like we'll have that, it's the overhype. I mean, because realistically, the book is probably good, but everyone's overhyping it, so you're expecting it to be the best book you've ever read. Because I'm a very easy to please person too. I am like, sometimes I feel like there's something wrong with me because every book I read is like 5-star, 5-star, 5-star. Because I genuinely enjoy the story, but it's always those books that I get overhyped about. I'm just like, well.
And I think it is just you have to like set your expectations going in. I do think most of the books that I've really, really loved are books I had no real expectations for going into it. I will also give a shout out to Dazzling Bookish Box because almost all of the books that they've picked I have loved. Almost every single pick from them is a win for me. So
that's cool.
I also guess they just have good taste because if you're into queer fiction, it is a queer-only book subscription, and I love it, and the books are always really pretty. But yeah, almost all the books that they've done, I have adored. So, but I also I've never heard of most of the books.
I was going to say that. I knew it.
Yeah, I'm also like a chronically not online person. in the sense of I am so out of the loop of everything. I'm in like a couple servers and I'm like, oh, this book that everyone knows about. And I'm like, what? I promise I read. I just don't know what you guys are talking about. So I'm very out of the loop when it comes to what's popular. And when I do see things come across and people being like, oh, I love this. This is so good. This is so good. I usually pass because I'm like, now I'm expecting things. And that's never good.
No, it's not. And that's why I tend to be very rarely I read what's trending. I've all my life always been like a hop on that bandwagon after the trend's over. I've always been a little delayed at that for some reason. I don't know why. So I know like the whole ACOTAR thing, I will probably pick it up later on when it's not overly hyped and actually try to sit down and read it because I tried and I just can't get into it. I always tend to read books that are not trending. Always. It's just and it makes me happy.
What I used to do was I'd go to the bookstore and I'd pick a bunch of books that sounded interesting and I'd read the first chapter of the book. So then I'd figure out like, oh, do I like this writing style or not? And then lately I had like a lot of disappointing reads. So now I go to the bookstore and I take a photo of the book and then I go to the library. So that way I don't get mad if I buy a book that I didn't like. And that's also been great because the library is actually within walking distance for my job. So when I have to go into the office, I can walk to the library on my lunch break. And I've been using that so frequently that the librarians recognize me now and will start like pulling my books for me from the whole shelf before they scan my card. But it's been really, really nice. And it's also been very fun to kind of work through the backlog of books that I never picked up for one reason or another. And that's been super fun. I actually read Shadow and Bone by Leigh Bardugo for the first time last year, which is insane considering I was obsessed with Six of Crows back in high school. And I had never read any of her other books. I read Shadow and Bone. And then I also read Ninth House. And Ninth House was one of my favorite reads of last year. And that one I was expecting not to like. A lot of books that I go into being like, I don't think I'm going to like this, end up being my favorites. And I think it's because I'm expecting them to not be good, that when they are good, I'm so thrilled. So it's almost I'm probably overhyping stuff because I was just convinced I wasn't going to like.
I feel like I do that too. I guess that's the fun part of reading. All right, I'm going to ask you. Well, we've been on for a while. I think I kept you on for over an hour, actually. I'm sorry.
You're so fine. I am very chatty.
Me too. Like I started off doing this podcast, and I'm like, I want them to be 30 minutes long. I think maybe the very first podcast is 30 minutes long. Very first episode. Every other episode I record is an hour, sometimes an hour and a half. I talk.
Listen, I love yapping, and I love yapping about books. We also, for a book club, are like, oh, our meetings are an hour. If I am in the book, because we do a couple different books, if I am in the session, it is always more than that. Also, I apologize. I have to rotate my phone because my phone is dying.
I just have one more question, and then I'll let you go. My last question, which I love everybody, is: are you a coffee or tea person, or maybe something else entirely, or not?
All right, I have a very definitive answer to that, and the answer is something else. I hate coffee. I can't stand it. I can tolerate tea. There's like two specific, very, very specific types of tea I like. One's a lavender tisane, and the other is a blend that I'm not going to name because it is specific to the tea shop local to my area. But it's like pineapple and black tea with rose petals and some other stuff thrown in it. So it's really, really tasty. However, almost every single day I have hot chocolate.
Really?
I am known for it at my office because I also bring in whipped cream.
Oh,
And
wow.
so the people who sit outside of our kitchen know it's me because they hear the whipped cream go. And every day I have hot chocolate. And my
So
partner
happy.
is worse than me. He will have 2 to 3 cups per day. We get gifted the like Swiss Miss, like the giant buckets of the Swiss Miss, like loose powder. Every Christmas, my mom gets us each one, and then it's usually gone within the month.
Oh, so that's what I was going to ask you. Like, how do you drink it? Do you drink Swiss Miss, and what would you put in there? Or
It is Swiss Miss. I have a joke that you can always tell how bad of a morning I had. If it's a normal morning, it's just the hot chocolate with the whipped cream. If it's a bad morning, it's hot chocolate with whipped cream and sprinkles. And if I'm having a terrible morning, it's whipped cream, sprinkles, and cinnamon.
oh, I love that. Wow. Well, that's a first on this show, and that is
Yes,
all right.
I'm
Friend.
hot chocolate forever.
I love it.
I watched
All
The
right.
Polar Express too much as a child, and I'm like, hot chocolate is the premier drink.
Well, then we have one other question for you. Did your partner drink hot chocolate before the two of you met, or did you find another hot chocolate lover?
Ooh. It's a hard question to answer because he's a video game developer. We really did we're going to be stereotypes together. So he's a video games developer.
Yeah.
And when I met him, well, firstly, we were actually ballroom partners, which is a fun little thing. Is we got paired together because neither of us went to lessons a lot. But then we kept getting bullied into signing up for the competitions, and our coach was like, well, you guys don't practice, so we can't put you with anyone else.
That's hilarious.
But he always liked hot chocolate, but didn't have access to it. But since I always had hot chocolate around, he started drinking it. And then when we moved in together, we just have a permanent supply. We have usually at least 2 to 3 types of hot chocolate in the house, just as backups in case we run out. But yeah, he has always liked hot chocolate. I don't think his hot chocolate addiction was as bad when we met, and my supply of hot chocolate has only made it worse.
Okay, so being together, you helped him find a new hot beverage for the morning, essentially. Rather
Well,
than
he
the
also
typical.
doesn't like coffee and also only loosely likes tea. So we were kind of in the same boat. And we both do like a hot drink in the morning. So on weekends and work from home days, because I start work about an hour and a half before he does, he'll bring me my hot chocolate into my office in the morning.
Oh, that's so cute. I love that. All right, friends. So I kept you for a while, and I'm sure you're ready for dinner. So it was a pleasure chatting with you. I do hope to
This
get,
was so much fun.
and I'm going to look into your book very soon.
Well, thank you. And I hope it's something that tickles your fancy. Like I said, everyone got different tastes. So I take no offense when people don't like it.
Sure, it's good enough. Well, you take care. Enjoy the rest of your night. It was fun.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode of The Bookish Spell. I hope you enjoyed our magical bookish journey together. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And feel free to leave a review. It really helps. I'll be back next Wednesday with more enchanting stories and author insights. Until next time, keep the magic alive in your hearts and on your bookshelves.